Okay, so once more, hello everyone. Let me welcome you at the World Logic Day in Warsaw, but in fact we are not only in Warsaw, but in many different places because of the possibilities of online meetings. So let me welcome you whenever you are. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you at our discussion, at our panel discussion entitled Italians Have Bel Canto, Poles Have Logic. Why is logic a Polish speciality? And why such a title? This saying, Italians have bel canto, Poles have logic, it is something ascribed to Tadeusz Kotarbiński, who used to say that logic is a real Polish speciality. But in fact, both in the history of the 20th century and now in the 21st century, Polish is a leading country in logic, in mathematics, in artificial intelligence. And today we are going to wonder why it is so. What are factors, what are reasons that Polish philosophers, Polish logicians, Polish mathematicians are such successful in their fields? And our guests today are the following. Professor Jan Woleński from Jagiellonian University. Hello, Jan. Professor Peter Simons from Trinity College, Dublin. Professor Srečko Kovač from Institute of Philosophy in Zagreb. Dr. Zuzanna Rybarzikowa from University of Ostrava. Professor Kordula Świętorzecka from Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński University in Warsaw, and Dr. Adam Trybus from Jagiellonian University, but today he represents Studia Logica, our logical journal. Okay, so the order of our meeting is as follows. We will start from presentations of our guests, and then we will just move to the discussion. I know that Zuzanna has to leave us earlier, unfortunately, so perhaps we will start from Professor Jan Woleński, then as our coryphée of our logical investigations here, and then we will ask Zuzanna to present her speech, and then we'll see. Okay, so please let me welcome once again Professor Jan Woleński.
Thank you for inviting me. I must say that I don't know this word of Kotarbiński about bel canto and logic. I know another phrase. It was from his paper and talk in Rome, I guess, about the history of Polish logic. He said, Polish logician, like Italian tenor, the testimony of the highest mastery. As I said, these words were included at the beginning of Kotarbiński's lecture on logic and in Poland. And, you know, in comparison of, I think for him, for Kotarbiński, of Italian tenors and Polish logicians was related to the place in which his talk was delivered. But there are other analogies. Namely, Poland had two great logical theaters, namely Warsaw, Warszawa, and Lwów. Well-established logical bel canto, distinguished conductors and solists like Tarski, Leśniewski, Łukasiewicz, Ajdukiewicz, probably other, Lindenbaum. Very beautiful arias, like many valued logic, Leśniewski's ontology, and the semantic theory of truth, courses in many Polish academic circles, but also quite very wide publicity in schools and universities. So leaving analogies with opera, I am very sensitive to such comparisons, because I and Przemysław Przywoszyński from Poznań, we wrote a book about opera as an art, but anyway, Przywoszyński is also a philosopher. We didn't noted this analogy between logic and Polish logic in Poland and opera. But to go to more sociological facts, Polish School of Logic gained a very great international recognition. It started in 1931, I guess, when a book by Heinrich Scholz, A Short History of Logic, was published, in which he said that in recent years, due to Jan Łukasiewicz, Warsaw became one of the world capitals of mathematical logic. Abraham Frenkel and Yehoshua Bar Hillel, in a very well-known textbook textbook and monograph on set theory, wrote that not proportionally, I have no literal quotation, to the number of inhabitants, Poland contributed to mathematical logic and set theory as no other country. This tradition of Polish Logical School was continued by Tarski in Berkeley University in California, where he created another important logical school. I remember the word of opinion of Anil Nerot, an American logician, who told me during Tarski's seminar in Warsaw in 2003 that logicians in other American universities were very jealous, looking at great success of Tarski's organization. And still one anecdote. In first part of discussion was presented Tarski's booklet on mathematical logic and didactic method, which was dedicated to secondary schools, however, not for all students, but only interested in mathematics. This book was translated in English, into English in 1941 by Oxford University Press, and edited several times in US. And when I said, I think that also to Nerod, that this booklet was written for American students, sorry, for students of secondary schools. So he answered, my goodness, this book was too difficult for most American university students. So it shows the level of Polish School of Logic. Now, even if we share his view about the Cantor and Polish logic or logic in Poland, or Kotarbiński words, which I quoted, mentioned. So all considerations, Haiti, Italians have bel canto, Polish have logic, are more rhetoric than substantial, I guess. This analogy is very nice, but I think that it hidden to some extent a very important point, namely, more proper view is that the development of logic in Poland was a result of very well planned and well realized projects in philosophy and mathematics. I mean that Polish academic community very well understood about 1916, just before recovering Polish independence, that science is one of the most important factors in the proper development of any country. So it is interesting that the first journal, which was entirely devoted to the problem of science, of theory of science, was organized in Poland. It was Nauka Polska, Polish science, and the first issue published still during First War was devoted to the problems of the future organizations of science in Poland. Subtitle was on needs of Polish science. And then was this discussion was continued in other issues. So one of the most important and famous contributions were Janiszewski's paper on needs of Polish mathematics, with his famous program of the development of mathematical logic and the foundations of mathematics. So according to Janiszewski, Poland has no great chances to be in as a leading country in mathematics when traditional branches of mathematics would be put on front of the development. We need to come to the mathematical world with something new. Unfortunately, he decided to propose foundations of mathematics and also several steps in organization, fundamental mathematics, and so on. And so what is interesting that Janiszewski's program was very similar to Twardowski's program of development of philosophy in Poland. Twardowski very greatly respected, for example, Henryk Struve and his project of reviving national philosophy. However, he was skeptical about a success of this idea. So Twardowski was maybe not very positivistic. However, he shared in this respect, similarly like Janiszewski, the idea of work from foundations, work from organic work, in the sense of Polish positivism. So we should organize step by step, and his stressing of the role of logical culture in national life, as he said in one of his papers that the entire our life is an examination of logic. I have no document, I cannot document it, perhaps his works on Encyclopedia of Warsaw School, and this is something related to contacts of Twardowski and Janiszewski, because this similarity is very, very striking, very particularly, and it is the last part of my remarks, if we compare this very successful work on establishing of logic and philosophy in the interwar Poland with the situation, the present situation, when philosophy is still expelled from high school, when logic is limited at many Polish universities due to very stupid rules concerning pensas and also evaluations and so on. So, of course, professors of mathematics, for example, philology, prepare to have specialized lectures, then lectures in philosophy and logic. I think that we should fight, maybe not without exaggeration, because the situation cannot be repeated. However, is very much to do in order to, repeat. It is something very striking that Ajdukiewicz and his colleagues, are mostly Ajdukiewicz, convinced Polish authorities that logic should be taught at all universities and in all directions of studies. Also, Studia Logica was, first volume was published in 1953, when was the peak of Stalinist era. So it is very sad to observe that authorities at that very difficult and subordinated to ideology time understood that logic can contribute to intellectual health of Polish life. If we look at, for example, is also my second specialty, now second, at the time it was first, for example, quality of Polish law. So I am sure that many statutes in the 50s were much better formulated than present. So it is still we have a national enterprise to revive logic in public life. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Woleński. Now, as I said before, it's time for Zuzanna Rybazikowa because she has to leave before 2 p.m. Yes, because of exams. Please, Zuzanna, University of Ostrava, our long-lasting friend and collaborator of the Lwowsko-Warszawska Research Center.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you. Thank you very much for opportunity to speak today, and also for opportunity to speak so early because due to my exams. When you send us the questions why logic is Polish specialty, I was thinking about several answers, and there are several obvious ones that are mentioned in literature. For instance, the demographical ones, that there happen to be many talented people gathered in Warsaw, and later on also at other universities. There's also mentioned several times that interdisciplinarity. Also, Professor Woleński mentioned the fact that philosophers cooperate with mathematicians and later on with other experts was quite important, and it seems to be quite important even today, the cooperations between different fields of study. And also several times was mentioned that Twardowski, Łukasiewicz, and other members of the Warsaw School were great teachers. So they attracted people that originally didn't even think about dealing with philosophy or logic. For instance, you probably know that Łukasiewicz started as a student of law, and later on he moved to philosophy. And it was the case with some other members of the Warsaw School. So you can see I'm a historian of logic, so I will mainly address this case in the Warsaw School. What I want to mention, two points that are not so much, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong and you can then prove me wrong later on, and mentioned not so often. The one is that the philosophy that Twardowski brought to Poland and developed in Poland was scientific philosophy. It means a philosophy that strives for using scientific methods. Of course, in Twardowski's case, it was mainly psychology, but he also taught logic, as you may know. And in my opinion, this is the field of philosophy where you can use and develop logic. Because if he was a representative of some irrationalistic movement of philosophy, and there was plenty of them in the 19th century, there would be no place for logic. I mean, still there could be great logicians in Poland because they could be mathematician logicians, or there could be some other, not so likely some other field of philosophy. But still, the fact that Twardowski strived for scientific philosophy, the philosophy that had a scientific method that is built like a science. He strived for clarity, which is quite common, and for other merits that are very close to logic, and that he even started to teach logic, was a very important point, according to me, for a development of logic, especially in this philosophical part. And the second point that I think this is mentioned quite often, but for me it's a very important point in the development of Polish logic, and I may be wrong because I'm from Czech, but hopefully not, was the act of rebellion by Łukasiewicz. The fact that Łukasiewicz, you may know, in philosophical school this is quite common. There is some founding father, and then there was a rebellion because some of the students thought that things are slightly different. And in Warsaw School, it was, of course, Łukasiewicz, who, against Twardowski, thought that the proper method is logic, and he's tried to convince the other students. He was slightly older than Kotarbiński, Leśniewski, and Edukiewicz and Rzeszowski. So he was, I think he was even probably their teachers in Lwów for a while. This is also quite known in literature that his book on principles of contradiction in Aristotle is something that is, especially at the beginning of the development of logic in the Warsaw School, mentioned very often as the starting point for their research, even though still, I mean, in this book, Łukasiewicz, when he talk about symbolic logic and mathematical logic, he's mainly mentioned conturat, which was not like cutting-edge science or cutting-edge logic at that time, but he also mentioned, and this is very well known, the Russell's paradox from Principia, which affected especially Leśniewski, and further development of logic in the Warsaw School. So I just want to, my contribution is very brief because this is something which is very often discussed. What I want to point out is, for me, in my opinion, very important, except of all the other factors that I mentioned, was the fact that in Poland at that time, the leading philosophical thoughts, the thoughts promoted by Twardowski, was ideas of scientific philosophy that allowed logic and the doubt cooperations with other fields that develop logic, like mathematicians. And a very important figure, according to me, is Łukasiewicz, who was a kind of rebel because he promoted a different method of scientific philosophy than his teacher Twardowski, but was also a great teacher and inspired many other logicians. Some of them may even be more important than Łukasiewicz, as for instance Tarski, probably also Leśniewski and their students. But still, he was a very important starting figure for all the development, especially if we are talking about this philosophical branch of logic, which I want to talk today. So this is all for me. Thank you for attention, and thank you for possibility to speak today.
Thank you. Great, Susanna. Thank you also for that. It was short, because brevity is a good feature, yes, and we worship it really. And now let us move from Ostrava to London, I think. Peter, are you in London, or where are you?
Hello. Sorry, I don't live in London. I wish I did. I live in a small town near the south coast of England.
Okay. So anyway, we are moving to England. Let me welcome once again Professor Peter Simons, who is wearing today a beautiful tie. Is it after Leśniewski, please?
Yes. I don't wear ties very often these days, but I do on special occasions. And World Logic Day is a special occasion, so I spent 10 minutes trying to work this out. So you're very privileged. Not many people see me in a tie.
Oh.
I'm going to my talk is very straightforward. It's basically a set of footnotes to what Jan said, which I sort of predicted what he would say. I'm going to have a I think a very straightforward, commonsensical explanation of the prevalence and brilliance of logic in Poland. which does not agree with the publicity, and I'll say why at the end. I'll talk about language at the end. There are about 5 factors, I think, which influence the reason why logic in Poland was such a big deal and was so world leading. And in sort of reverse order of importance, as I rank them, they would go luck, Polish independence, mathematical logicians, mathematical training, and Twardowski. So in reverse order of importance, so Twardowski, I think, is the most important. Let's start with luck. Poland had at least one great genius in logic. That's Alfred Tarski. There's no dispute about that. I think the relationship between Lwowsko, who was a great logician, and Tarski, who was a genius logician, is somewhat similar to the relationship between Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra. This is not bel canto, but it is singing. Crosby is said to have said, a singer like Frank Sinatra comes along only once in a lifetime. It's a pity it had to be during my lifetime. Now, actually, they got on very well. Crosby described himself as a crooner and Sinatra as a singer. And I think that's a fair comparison. And I think Lwowsko and Tarski are in a similar relationship. But geniuses are not a national prerogative. They are spread or distributed relatively evenly across nations. And if we just think of logical geniuses, think of the Moravian Austrian Gödel, the Hungarian von Neumann, the American Church, the Englishman Turing. These are all geniuses, and they're spread more or less randomly across the advanced nations. So Poland was lucky to have good logicians. It was extremely lucky to have a genius logician. The second feature is Polish independence. And although, of course, the Lwów-Warsaw School started in Lwów during the relatively light touch and more or less enlightened rule of Austria in southern Poland, the school came to international prominence only between the wars with the development of the Warsaw School of Logic. And independence, as Jan pointed out, had an important role to play in that. Poland, in fact, got their educational act together rather quickly, more quickly than they got together problems like the gauge of the railways, the unified currency, the economic system, and so forth. So education in Poland was well organized relatively quickly. And of course, we know that Łukasiewicz had a hand in that at a political level in the early years of independence. What can we say about independence? The idea was, and Jan correctly mentioned Januszewski, the idea was that Poland as a young reborn nation could not compete in mathematics with the established mathematical nations like Germany and France and Britain and the USA in the traditional or classical areas of mathematics like analysis, algebra, geometry. So they should pick new areas at which they would start more or less without a handicap. And they chose topology, set theory, foundations of mathematics and mathematical logic. And that was a very wise decision. And Januszewski was seconded by Szczepiński and Mazurkiewicz in this choice. So they were very willing to promote people who could enhance and provide education in and research in mathematical logic. And it's interesting that the first two professors of mathematical logic, namely Łukasiewicz and Leszniewski, were in a sense outliers because they were both trained as philosophers, not as mathematicians, but they both got chairs in the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science in Warsaw, which I think was a very enlightened touch. mathematics, the importance of mathematics, whether in Poland or elsewhere, is underlined by the fact that the great advances in logic, and I say logic, not just mathematical logic, the great advances in logic from the 19th century to, let's say, the mid-20th century were mostly, nearly all, brought about by people who were either mathematicians or who had a rigorous mathematical training. And I've just put down a brief list of names just to bring to your attention: Bolzano, Boole, De Morgan, Schroeder, Peano, Frege, Whitehead, Russell, Hilbert, Bernays, Schoenfinkel, Curry, Church, Turing. These were all either mathematicians or had received rigorous mathematical training. I left out Peirce, probably the greatest American thinker of all time, because Peirce, although he didn't do an undergraduate degree in mathematics, he did chemistry, which he rightly hated. His father was a prominent mathematician who organized American academic life. And poor old Charles Peirce received his mathematical training as a young boy from his father. And Peirce was not just a mathematician, he was a Renaissance man. He was an all-round genius. So mathematics really had a big hand in the development of logic. Not just the big names, but in other areas, even relatively minor logicians like Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll was not a first-rate logician, but he did inaugurate one interesting innovation, namely logic trees. He did it for syllogistic, not for propositional or predicate calculus, but he did invent it. And he was, by profession, a mathematician. He was a lecturer in mathematics in Oxford, taught geometry in particular. So let's get on to Twardowski. Twardowski, in my opinion, is perhaps, I think, definitely the most successful teacher of philosophy in the history of the subject. He had a great teacher himself, Brentano, and it's interesting to compare them in various dimensions. Brentano had made his impact by rhetoric. He was a brilliant speaker, but he was also somebody who propagated the idea of a school in the German tradition. That is where the pupils or acolytes follow the doctrines of the master and help the master to international recognition and fame. Twardowski, by contrast, took one thing from Brentano, namely the idea that philosophy has a scientific method, and he inculcated that method in his students, but he did not force them to believe the things that he believed as philosophical doctrine or content. He allowed them to go their own way, and that was entirely appropriate. And the one of his students who did think that you should go the way of doctrine, his successor was Ingarden, had learned how to do schooling in Germany, not in Poland. So he learned it from Husserl, not from Twardowski. And of the two, I think Twardowski was right and Ingarden was wrong, as Brentano himself found out to his cost, because nearly all of his students went their own way. If you have brilliant students, they're going to learn to think for themselves, and they're going to learn to undermine some of the views of their teacher. So Twardowski, I think, set the stage. He was not a logician himself, but he set the stage. Let me just say one or two words about Łukasiewicz and Leśniewski. Both trained as philosophers, both extremely detailed, accurate, rigorous in the way in which they did their logic, and they brought their rigor from their general educational and philosophical training into their logic. And interestingly, they also brought something which was relatively absent from various other forms of logic as practiced in Germany and Austria, namely the idea that logic has content of its own, that the expressions you use, the logical constants and the things that the variables range over, are not just formal in the sense of Hilbert. They have content and they have meaning. And both of those philosophers plugged that idea. Łukasiewicz with the idea that the truth values that you get, say, in many valued logic have some specific meaning and significance. And Leszczynski in the idea that the constants that he used in his logical systems come to logic with a specific meaning. And that brings me to the last point, which is about the language. Much as I love the Polish language and I love its detailed accuracy and its fussiness about grammar by comparison with many other languages, which makes it harder to learn for people from non-Slavic languages, not as hard as Arabic or Japanese, but still pretty hard. Nevertheless, when it came down to actually doing logic, the logicians did not introduce Polish grammar to logic. They simplified things. And you find this in Leszczynski in particular. And there's an interesting intermediate position in Leszczynski. When Leszczynski started doing logic rigorously, he didn't use symbols except for variables. He was like Aristotle. And he did use Polish grammar. So I will just introduce one sentence from his 1916 work on collections, which is a theorem, Theorem 7, and I'll quote it in Polish because you can see how he's using Polish grammar alongside literal or letter variables. And later what happens is he drops the Polish grammar and he sort of builds it into the logical constants and then loses the complicated endings of Polish declensions. Jeżeli P jest klasą przedmiotów M, to P jest mnogością przedmiotów M. That's theorem 7 of his theory of part and whole, or theory of collections, as he called it. And notice that he's using expressions like klasa and przedmiot, and he is declining them correctly for the particular place in that sentence. And the only variables are just letter variables. They're just standing in for nouns or verbs, or in this case, nouns, singular and plural, probably. But when he comes to fully formalizing his logic from 1920 onwards, then the Polish grammar disappears. And this is all you're left with are those new logical constants like jest and chęść and things like that. So what happens is that the Polish precision in the logic, the kind of precision that you get in Polish grammar, disappears. And this is what makes Polish logic from the interwar years so easy to be translated into world languages like German, French, and English. So I think, sadly, I mean, much as I love the analogy, all I will say is that, sure, Italy has bel canto. It also has verismo. It also has Verdi and Puccini and Bellini, but geniuses are spread about in opera just as much as they are spread about in logic. So not only do we have Caruso and Pavarotti, we also have Jussi Björling, we also have Jonas Kaufmann, we also have, who can we think, Placido Domingo. So there are geniuses spread about randomly in the world in opera just as much as there are in logic. And with that deflationary explanation, I will end and say dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękujemy bardzo. Thank you, Peter, also for introducing this problem of Polish language. Recently, there are many articles in internet that say that according to the newest research, the Polish language is the best to interact with artificial intelligence, with ChatGPT and so on, because Polish language is the more detailed and strict in conversations. So perhaps there is something in Polish grammar and in Polish vocabulary that makes us more, I don't know, suitable to be logicians and mathematicians and work with AI. Okay, thanks very much. And now we are moving from north to south. And let me welcome Professor Srečko-Kovač, who is joining us from Zagreb. Yes, from Croatia. Hello, Srečko. So nice to see you today. And you may now present your.
I'm glad to be here. I mean, in this company. So, if possible, I would like to share my screen because I have some maps.
Great.
Just a moment. Can it be seen now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So just a moment. Okay. So let us start. So from this question, why is logic a Polish specialty? And especially in light of this saying, Italians have bel canto, Poles have logic. So thinking about this, I thought that to come closer to an answer to this question, why logic is a Polish specialty, I thought we should compare the Polish and Italian flourishing period in logic at the beginning, but including their respective backgrounds, including politics and even geopolitics. So, of course, the flourishing period of logic in Poland is the 20th and 21st centuries, historically, especially 1920s and 1930s. Of course, it is the Lwowsko-Warszawska school founded by Twardowski and continued by his direct or indirect pupils, Łukasiewicz, Leszniewski, Tarski, Jarzkowski, and others. And it is this school to which we owe many fundamental and commonly accepted results in logic. As to the background of this period, there is what is happening simultaneously is the transition from the partition of Poland to the independence and unification, and later on from the Eastern Bloc hegemony to freedom. But Italy had also its flourishing period in logic, not so vast as in the Polish case, and not with so many results, but still strong and very influential tradition in the 15th and the 16th century. And it is particularly the so-called Paduan school, culminating with Jacopo Sabarella, an Aristotelian school of logic, considered by at least some historians methodological preparation for the Galilean science. If we turn to the general political background, at that time Italy was divided into several entities, independent or under foreign rule, but the Republic of Venice, where Padua is situated, the Republic of Venice at that time was a political, military, and cultural power. What should also be mentioned is that in Italy, mathematical logic was established at the turn of the 20th century, and the founders, who are considered Giuseppe Peano and Albino Nach, who came in Italy from Dalmatia. So part of the answer, as it seems, to the initial questions probably may be found in the background, the geopolitical placement of Poland. Here is the map from the seminal work in geopolitics by Helfer John Mackinder, where we can see Poland in the what he calls inner marginal crescent, later called Rimland, very near to the pivot area, later called Heartland, and in the last centuries dominated by Russia. And Mackinder states the following: Russia replaces the Mongol Empire her pressure on Finland, on Scandinavia, on Poland, on Turkey, on Persia, on India, and on China, replaces the centrifugal raids of the statesmen. In the world at large, she occupies the central strategical position held by Germany in Europe. And here we have a slightly more detailed map by another classic of geopolitics, Nicholas John Spykman, where we see Poland, together with the whole Middle Europe, also exposed to the pressure from within the Rimland itself, especially from Germany. So that Spykman mentions, as he says, 1,000-year struggle between Teuton and Slav over the buffer region, as he calls it, of the Eastern Europe. Now, let us come to the 19th century in a bit more detail, which is the preparation of the rise of the Lwów-Warsaw School in the next century. When we compare the first half of the 19th century in Poland and Italy, we can see, as it seems, some essential similarities. As to the background, Poland was, as mentioned, partitioned under foreign rule. Italy was partitioned and largely under foreign rule. In both cases, there were some, at that time, unsuccessful uprising. And in addition, it was the time of Romanticism. And this is the time of the famous Italian bel canto, Bellini, Donizetti, Rossini. But in the second half of the century, there appeared essential differences. So in the case of Poland, after further unsuccessful uprising, a difficult and much more difficult geopolitical position than for Italy came to be evident. And so finally, the attitude and views prevailed, such as organic work, praca organiczna, mentioned already by Professor Wolensky, which can be described in the following way. Quote, the advocates of organic work emphatically repudiated armed insurrection and violent revolutionary change as means of achieving independence, and substituted instead the economic and cultural reconstruction of the nation as a prerequisite for independent statehood. In contrast to Poland, in Italy of this time, we have the eventually successful war for independence and unification. South was conquered, Venice was liberated from Austria, and even papal state in the middle of the Apennine Peninsula was conquered, and Rome became the capital of Italy. It is the time of new sort of opera, dramatic opera like Verdi, and we already mentioned the establishing of mathematical logic at the end of this time in Italy. As to the first half of the 20th century, we notice that a great flourishing period of 1920s and 1930s in Poland coincides with the achieved unity and independence of the Polish state only after the First World War. And it seems that there was no spontaneous decline of logic research in Poland, only due to the Second World War and the oppression by the Soviet Union in the afterworld period. in contrast, in Italy, after the turn of the centuries, it came step by step to a decline of mathematical logic, to be revived only later in the second half of the 20th century. Thus, we may conclude from this that the difficult geopolitical position of Poland may have contributed to the mobilization of cultural and intellectual capabilities, including analytic reasoning as in logic. But in addition to these general conditions, concrete circumstances also had to coincide. As it is said, the right people should be in the right place. And so Kazimierz Twardowski studied in Vienna at the end of the 19th century with Franz Brentano as his main teacher, but also with Robert Zimmermann, who was his official supervisor. I would like only to mention one positive impact made by Brentano, opening in accordance with Brentano's view of the history of philosophy and its development in cycles. So it is the opening of the perspective for a philosophical renaissance after the period, in his view, of full decadence and finishing the previous full cycle of 4 phases in philosophy. And thereafter, Twardowski's direct and indirect pupils followed. According to Wolensky, in 1939, there was about 80 scholars of the Lwów-Warsaw School, and I think, including later periods, according to Anna Brożek, even more than 100, if I rightly remember. Thus, a great momentum and enthusiasm resulted, with a quickly growing number of logicians and contributions in Poland. Now, as for a conclusion, from all this, a possible explanation of logic as a Polish specialty may lie in the following reasons. The historical and difficult geopolitical circumstances which requested a maximum of efforts, including culture and analytic reasoning, to survive and to prosper. Then accumulation of experience and skills through centuries. Great but realistic enthusiasm, national, cultural, theoretical. Then the feeling of individual freedom, even in pure theory, as confirmed by Łukasiewicz in his approach to many-valued logic. Then the recognition, as in Bohensky, of the same recurrent unifying spirit in all flourishing periods of logic, including the Lwów-Warsaw School. And further, a variety of worldviews within the Lwów-Warsaw schools, including formal and informal approach. And at last, as a conditio sine qua non, without which no flourishing period of logic would have been possible, a genuine logical gift is required, origins of which can be hardly explained. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kovács. I was worried that I didn't manage to invite an Italian scholar to our meeting, but Professor Kovács did it for the Italians. He presented the Italian tradition, both in logic and in music and in culture. So thank you very, very, very much for this great talk, for this large perspective. And now we still have 2 participants of our discussion. Professor Kurdula decided to be on the end, so now let me introduce Dr. Adam Trybus. Please, Adam.
Hi, hello. I hope you can hear me properly.
Yes.
So, first off, thank you to the organizers for inviting me. But I have to admit, I feel a little out of place, and there are two reasons for that. First is that I was asked to join such an illustrious set list of panelists. And the second reason is that I'm here primarily to talk about a recent project, a book on the history of Studia Logica, which is about to be published by Springer. And I have been invited to join this project by Jacek Malinowski, who is the editor-in-chief of Studia Logica. And it is truly his life's and professional passion to lead this journal. And I feel that it should have been him today talking to you about this project, but I'll do my best. So, but before I'll talk specifically about the history of Studia Logica and the book itself, let me share few remarks in general about the topic of our discussion. So first, I would like to challenge the premise of our meeting a little bit and stick it up for the Italians. Professor Kovac did it in some sense as well. But what I want to say is, obviously, there were very talented and influential mathematicians involved in the foundations of mathematics working in Italy. And Giuseppe Peano is the leading figure. But also, another person worth mentioning is Mario Pieri. And he was a collaborator of Giuseppe Peano. He also worked on the foundations of mathematics. Specifically, he worked on the foundations of geometry. And this is important because, so I would argue that we can say that Italians, okay, they had bel canto. And to be fair, I had to look it up, what bel canto was to my preparation for this talk, but I knew about Italians and their work on foundations. So I should say that Italians truly had the foundations of mathematics in that period. And there's a second point I want to make, because the story of the influence of Giuseppe Peano is quite well known. And so it goes from Giuseppe Peano to Russell, who around the turn of the centuries discovered Peano and his approach to mathematics, and he was a changed man after that. But it goes further. It actually goes, obviously, to the Polish school of logic, because it's also quite a well-known fact that young Łukasiewicz was very much influenced by the writings of Bertrand Russell, specifically the Principles of Mathematics. And so we can argue that Peano influenced Łukasiewicz, and actually in some of the entries in his diaries, I think Łukasiewicz admits that it was Russell's work that pushed him to do mathematical logic. And if Peano influenced Russell, then it can be said that by transitivity, Peano influenced Łukasiewicz as well. And I think, I'm speaking from memory, but I think that when Łukasiewicz mentions some big names in logic in his book on the principle of contradiction, Peano is one of them. So this is one direction, but there's another one with the name I mentioned as well. So Mario Pieri was he worked on the foundations of geometry, and his work was parallel to what Hilbert was doing at that time, and it was not that well known, but it was nevertheless very influential. And it was a different approach, because Pieri worked on a very formal and well-defined approach to the foundations of geometry. And specifically, people may know Pieri from the so-called Pieri's axiom, which is something that he spotted that was missing from the axioms that Euclid gave us, and they were accepted for the centuries prior to Pieri working out that there's some bits missing. So we can tell just from this that Pieri's approach was very formal and strict. But also he worked from a different point of view. He took different primitives as the beginning of the foundations of geometry. I think it was point and equidistance. And equidistance obviously now means, foreshadows what I want to say about the influence, because famously Alfred Tarski developed the foundations of Euclidean geometry using betweenness and equidistance, and there is a well-documented link between Pieri and Tarski, because as it happened around 1915, I think, Stefan Kwietniowski translated one of the texts by Pieri into Polish. And this was at some point read by young Tarski, who was then teaching at some gymnasium or some other type of high school, working on his geometry. And this greatly influenced him. Obviously, he was pushed to work on the foundations of geometry by Leśniewski as well. But an argument can be made that he was equally influenced by Pieri, and there is some evidence. There's an excellent article by John Smith, I think, where he recounts Tarski's words about the foundations of geometry during Smith's PhD defense. And apparently Tarski was dismissive of Hilbert's approach and advised Smith to work on Pieri instead. So if I were to sort of redo the title of our talk, of our meeting, it would be Italians had the foundations of geometry. The Poles had Italians, thus the Poles had have logic. And another topic which is also very interesting, but it's outside of the scope of our meeting, is in general the influence of geometry on the development of logic, which the connection between Pieri and Tarski is just one of the examples. So that's my first point. Second point is essentially a summary of what already has been said. So if I were to say anything about what makes Poland, in a sense, a special place for the development of logic, one thing comes to my mind is the words of the Chief of State Piłsudski, who around 1917 or the beginnings of 1918, he foresaw the collapse of the old empires, and he said that this will be a great opportunity for Poland as a new state to make great strides in many areas and develop in all sorts of ways. And I think what gave Poland this impetus, it was one of the things was precisely that it was a new nation on the map with new opportunities, and Poles could essentially jump over some hurdles of tradition and just focus on what was new and interesting and make some great strides in those fields. So in one sentence, I would say that this success story of logic is related to the determination of people that worked on the topic, starting from Twardowski, who influenced others with some conviction. It was the fact that we were a new nation, but also a very important factor is that the ideas became institutionalized, and so new institutions were developed around the teachings and around the seminars. Books appeared, journals were published, and so on. And I think it was realized early on that this sort of administrative approach is really something that will go a long way in terms of furthering the research, because we need the infrastructure in order to be able to do some interesting research. And I also think that was mentioned by one of the previous speakers that luck is something very important. And what I'm about to say about the beginnings of Studia Logica shows this the best. Without luck, there would be perhaps certain paths would be closed. And the final factor, I think, is what is called in rhetorics. There are four factors distinguished when it comes to delivering a great speech, which is ethos, pathos, logos, which is well known, and then there is kairos, which can be translated as the good timing. And I think we had good timing for logic, and well, it connects to the notion of luck as well. But I think this is something that should not be forgotten. So with those thoughts, let me begin my the proper part of my talk. But I would like to leave you with some...
Adam,
Yes?
sorry. Unfortunately, you have something like 5 minutes to finish, because we really, yes, we still have Cordula and some time for discussion. Okay, so.
Okay, let me speed it up then. Okay. So 5 minutes, you said. Okay, I would like to share something with you. So when I be speaking, I hope you could see some a collage of images coming from the book. So the book is called the Studia Logica, A History of the Journal. And in some sense, this entire book is a homage to a journal that was born out of passion for logic, and at some times held on by luck and a sheer determination to keep it going. And this journal, the history of which runs through troubled times and touches on the lives of a lot of people. Studia Logica had a rough start, and it did not seem that the stars aligned for it to become one of the most significant journals devoted to formal logic, but it happened. So Jacek Malinowski and me included, we thought that it's high time to tell the story of Studia Logica. One of the reasons is that it could be said that Studia Logica passed its 19th birthday recently, because it can be said that it was founded in 1934, and the name of Łukasiewicz pops up again. It was a single volume with one paper by Jaśkowski, and it was not continued for various reasons. And then it was revived after 20 years in 1953, 1954 by another well-known member of the Lwów-Warsaw School, Ajdukiewicz. And so, another important point came 20 years later, around 1974, where a new design was introduced with this now famous green cover and lettering. And then around 1990s, a move was made to connect Studia Logica to the international publishing world. And it's all described, all those two beginnings, 1934 and 1944, plus what happened afterwards, which you haven't really spoke about today as well. About 70, 80 years after the war that logic is still being developed, is described on the pages of the book. So I'm sensing that my time is almost entirely up. So I encourage you to have a look at the book when it comes out. I don't have time to mention all the contributors and people that really helped us work out the best way to tell the story of Studia Logica. We did it joining various planes, personal, professional. The history cuts through different places and times, and it's really more than just a history of a journal. It's a history of Polish logic in a nutshell. And so with that, I would like to thank you. But one final word for me regarding the future of logic. And I think, because I've been involved in some work on the recent AI systems, and what I see now happening is the revival of the foundational work on mathematics. For example, set theorists now are really discussing foundational topics on Twitter, on X, regarding how these things should properly be formalized using the LLM systems that we all know. And some of them, they even establish startups in the US working on the foundations of mathematics and trying to figure out theorem proving using LLMs and other systems. And I also think that what was happening in the Lwów-Warsaw School, namely the focus on proper reasoning and what it means to reason and different typologies of reasoning, would be is very important in the next steps of those AI system developments, for example, in terms of the so-called reasoning large language models. So I think things will change, but I think there will be still new impact to work on the foundational issues in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, and really sorry that I shortened your talk. Your introduction was so interesting and so full of content that we had to make the main part shorter. But the book is about to be published. It's wonderful. I saw it, and congratulations to this project.
Thank you, and thank you for contributing to it as well.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. But concerning the thought that you challenged the title of the content of the title of our conference. Well, in fact, if we say that logic is Polish specialty, and that Poles have logic and Italians have bel canto, we of course don't state at the same time that Italians don't have logic and Poles don't have music or opera. So,
sure. I was just
a little excuse, okay? Okay, great. Thanks again, Adam. And
Thank
now
you.
let me introduce our last panelist, Professor Cordula Świętorzecka. Cordula,
should I take it like that?
Yes,
yeah?
but you should talk to the mic.
So I'm sorry, I cannot hesitate to say that I am so happy and honored to take part in this meeting. And I am very happy to see Professor Woleński and Professor Simons and Professor Kovac. And so for me, it is great that, that I can join you. I'm sorry that I didn't attend to the morning session, but parallelly we have also some celebration in Poznan. And so I took part also in the second conference. Anyway, there are many answers and many reasons which were already called and named and analyzed and presented why we have this beautiful logic, why Polish are so great logicians, were so great, but my thesis is that they are still great. And I would like to concentrate only on one small detail or one reason, which is of course not enough, only one of this many which were called. And it was already announced somehow by Professor Simons, also Anya mentioned it, and also Adam in his closing remarks said something about AI and Polish logic. So my talk is maybe not so historical, but more systematic, and is concentrated on some few remarks about structure of Polish language, which gave also the occasion, and maybe it was the reason that we Polish are so gifted in logic, not only in this period, beautiful period of Polish School of Logic or Warsaw School of Logic, but still Polish people are very gifted in logic. And one of the reasons is their language. Of course, one could ask what is first, talent or language, like hen or chicken. Yes, maybe we are so gifted and so we have this beautiful language, or conversely, maybe we have this language and because of it, we have this tendency for preciseness or for making this beautiful formal stuff, which is called logic. However, we know from the history of logic that this opposition between object-predicate sentences and function-argument sentences first was proposed by this classical traditional logic. This second was proposed later by Frege. Yes, here, I mean, this opposition was the reason that we switched into one of many, switched into this modern logic. So categorical grammar, let's say, grammar of our language really decided about many things concerning development in formal languages and informal logic. Peter, you talked about the specificity of Lwowsko-Warszawski approach, which was very linked at the beginning with Polish grammar. And later, as I understand, it was not so much connected as at the beginning. And still, there are many reasons to expect that our specific grammar is somehow positive thing to develop results in logic. Let me give you some recent example about which Anya mentioned some minutes ago. Namely, in one of the Polish portals, I met the following information. It was Business Insider. The title in Polish. Polski najlepszym językiem dla AI, angielski dopiero na 6. miejscu. In English. Polish is the best language for AI, and English is only on the 6th place. What is the point? Of course, artificial intelligence, and everybody knows it, it is some consequence of logical approaches and simply of logic. It is new, let's say, picture of these things which we created in the last centuries. And what does it mean? That AI is especially good concerning reading informations which are formulated in Polish. Well, I was very interested in this point, so I took the discussion with the professional informatician who is a member of our Department of Logic in my university, namely in Konrad Stanowski, and he explained me what is the point of this title and what is the point of this experiment, which was made by people from the University of Maryland in 2025. So they took 6 large language models and they gave special type of tasks to solve or to find some small information with quite long text. So they formulated a long information, and the language model had to find some small detail or maybe some lack of information in this long text. They checked 26 languages and so 6 big language models. And what they obtained, one has to say that at first, the most rich source for training is dedicated to English. It is nearly 7 million articles, which is the source of training models in English language. Concerning Polish, we have only 1.5 million articles, and Chinese 1 and something similar to Polish. However, we should mention that there are 1.5 million China people, and we are only 30, maybe 4 million people. Yeah. And so they gave these tasks to, they put these 4 tasks in this 4 language models. They translated these tasks in 26 languages. This was done by native speakers. And what they obtained, in effect, the best language to find this small information or to find the lack of small information was Polish. It was 88% of correct detections. Concerning English, English was only at 6th position. So, of course, these titles in newspapers, yes, they are, based mainly of situation that people do not know what does it mean really. So after this big boom and this big noise, this scientist corrected or explained what was really the experiment, and so they reduce, let's say, big expectations of people. At first, they underlined that these tasks which were given to models, it was only really one type of tasks. In particular, they didn't check, for example, the ability of making reasonings or the ability of preparing definitions or the ability to formulate questions basing off the texts. But this is true that, concerning this task, Polish was the first, even it is trained on so small amount of sources when you compare it with English. Why it is like that? Of course, people who specialize in Polish grammar, they know that at first Polish language is, in English we say that it is inflectional, yes, inflectional. So it means that you can put in any order words, putting at the end informations like gender or like declination or such things. And this, of course, you cannot do in English and in many other languages. So it was this is the point that when we speak, this language gives us the opportunity to code very many information already in grammar. And so when you formulate some sentences or expressions in Polish, your mind is somehow forced to make precise, let's say, structure or some picture or some, I don't know, maybe imaginational model, which you want to describe in your language. And this is one of the points that these big languages models, they can detect this information which are coded already in Polish language. So maybe this is one of many reasons that these fantastic people who were concentrated around Twardowski also had this ability and talent to formulate so beautiful and precise structures and systems just because of our language. So it is my only, not to say hypothesis, and I would be very happy if somebody could comment it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Cordula. It's great that you developed this language argument. And now let me open the discussion. We still have about half an hour for questions, answers, comments. So if anyone would like to comment on the statements of our panelists or add something to the discussion or ask the question, yes, Peter Samus would like to start. Please, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you for all the interesting contributions. This has rounded the subject out very nicely. And I thank you especially, Cordula, because of the more detailed analysis of that respect in which Polish is ahead of other languages. That's very interesting. I just want to say two things about that. Firstly, poor old English, but nevertheless, I can see why English is hard work for AI by comparison with Polish, because English uses, I mean, it has a very big lexicon, but it uses the same words, the same strings of letters in many, many different ways. I recently read that the word run, R-U-N, has 65 different meanings in English. And I'm quite prepared to believe that. English is not the worst language in this respect. I believe Arabic is much worse, but I only take that secondhand. So that's an interesting point to mention, that AI may actually find it easier to get detailed information out of grammatical sentences of Polish than grammatical sentences of other languages which have greater scope for ambiguity. That's one point. The other point is I'd like to thank Adam Tribus for his mention of Mario Pieri. One thing I didn't have much time to talk about was that Tarski was fascinated by geometry from the time, indeed, probably from the time when he was a student. He famously taught in secondary schools mathematics, and he would teach geometry to the students. And even Lwowsko taught geometry to Polish speakers in Moscow during the First World War. So there is a little bit of geometry in the, shall we say, in the DNA of Polish logic. And in two or three interesting things about Pieri. I agree with Tarski that Pieri's approach to the foundations of geometry is better than that of Hilbert. Hilbert had three basic notions, whereas Pieri just has points and equidistance. In Pieri's case, a three-place notion. He also has a one called point and motion. I think that's an earlier version of the foundations of geometry. Tarski's wonderful work in geometry is almost unknown among philosophers, but deserves to be better known. He produced the first properly formulated axiomatization of first-order geometry, that is, within first-order predicate calculus, which has all sorts of nice meta-mathematical properties like completeness and decidability. I don't think it's adequate for geometry in the same way I don't think that first order arithmetic is adequate for arithmetic. So I think you do need axiom of continuity and various other things to do geometry properly, but that's an incidental point. Tarski worked on his geometry for decades, and he got help from Wanda Śmielec before she died. And his model was Pieri, but because Tarski was so brilliant, he improved on Pieri in various other ways. In particular, in the brevity of his axioms, it's said, and I would have to take Elena Anna Marchisotto's word for this, that one of Pieri's axioms is longer than all of Tarski's put together. So that's really important, that there was good mathematical work coming out of the Italian school. Peano himself was brilliant in his earlier years, and I think declined later. Later lectures consisted in rambling monologues on auxiliary languages. But Pieri sadly did not live long enough to see his work reflected elsewhere. So it's certainly a very, very interesting topic, and I think it's well worth carrying on thinking about how to do the foundations of geometry. Most philosophy of mathematics in recent years has concentrated on the foundations of arithmetic. And arithmetic is literally child's play by comparison with Euclidean geometry, as we know, because it took over 2,000 years for some of the missing axioms of Euclidean geometry to be recognized, Pasch, for example, and Pieri as well. So I think if we could do some more foundations on geometry, Euclidean and non-Euclidean, I think the applications of logic in mathematics would benefit from that. So I think that's all I need to say at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And I think that Tadeusz Szubka raised his hand.
Yeah, I have a little historical question to Adam Trybus. I mean, this wonderful project of history of Studia Logica, and it comes to my mind one thing. I mean, I suppose it will be again a laudatory history, not a real history. But when I was a student in Lublin, and I was a student of Borkowski, and I heard him at least 2 or 3 times, very bitter. There was some quarrel around 70s, and Borkowski didn't accept the course Studia Logica was taking. He was thinking, oh, Ajdukiewicz has this wonderful idea that it will be a journal of philosophical logic, important papers, and now it was kidnapped by all these formal logicians, mindless formal logicians who don't know what they are doing. And I myself will never, ever publish a paper in this journal because it was taken by these bad people, for mindless formal logicians. And when you look into bibliography of Borkowski's papers, you will see that to a certain point he was publishing regularly in Studia Logica, and then he just went on to publish everything in Roczniki Filozoficzne, local journal at that time. And it was his choice, basically, and I don't know whether there are any signs in archives of Studia Logica of this bitter quarrel.
Okay, hi. So thank you for that. So first, I just want to say something to what Peter mentioned. I got confused. Obviously, I meant Pasch's axiom, not Pieri's axiom. His contributions are vast, but I don't think he picked holes in Euclid, but I don't think there's an axiom named after him. So that's a correction. And now for Professor Szubka. From what I recall in the book, Borkowski is a minor character. So, and I don't, well, it's a huge project, and we had contributors working on specific areas, and I didn't have access to the to the archives that you might be interested in. So I don't know if there's any recollection of that. But I'm quite surprised because my MA supervisor was Tomasz Skóra, and his supervisor was Borkowski, and so I never really knew much about Borkowski, but today I learned I was quite a bitter person. So that gives another dimension to what I think about what was happening. And one thing I can add to what you're saying is I'm also working on Łukasiewicz, and I went to the archives where his papers are in Manchester, and there are just boxes of papers to be properly analyzed. But I was able to spot some letters from Słupecki, for example, to Łukasiewicz, and there I think Słupecki mentions Borkowski as a young and up-and-coming logician with great hopes. So it was all quite positive when they were at the beginning talking, and they were talking about his involvement in Studia Logica as well. So yeah, I don't know what happened around the 1970s.
It was around by the end of the change of the journal by the end of 60s into 70s. Something went terribly wrong, and I mean, I was a very young graduate student, and I was quite confused what the fuss was about. So.
Yeah, that's one thing I also remembered. I think that initially Studia Logica was to publish, or at least the first beginnings of Studia Logica. They're mentioning the importance of Polish language, what Professor was talking about in the talk before, so that because it can express the nuances of formal reasoning better if you do it in your own native language. But I think maybe what happened is that the journal started being more international, and some people disliked this approach. And I think initially in the prefaces to the volumes, the goals of Studia Logica explicit, they're very broad. So it included informal logic and different types of approaches to logical reasoning than just formal logical stuff. And yeah, so I can understand that this could cause some problems.
If I can add something, as far as I know, Ajdukiewicz approach was much more tolerant than today's, let's say, editorial board of Studia Logica. He was convinced that formal papers and also studies in general methodology and logical semiotics should be included in Studia Logica. And in the first years of the journal existence, there were, for instance, papers like Kotelbińska on definition, completely informal paper, but it was studied in general methodology. And then there was this change of the direction of the journal, perhaps because there were also other journals founded which were more concentrated on these other topics, but maybe it's just, I don't know, a kind of direction which Ajdukiewicz would not accept so much,
May I? Well, here. So it's a pity that Borkowski was so, how to say, in contraposition to Studia Logica in some moment. Especially one should underline that he was really very gifted in formal logic. Also, yes, he was not against formal logic in general.
No,
especially this, of course not. Especially this contact between Słupecki and Borkowski, of course, was a result of beautiful natural deduction systems, yes, for propositional logic and for first-order predicate logic and so on. And so I am very surprised that he had such opinion about Studia Logica, and it's a pity, in fact.
Yeah, but he had the reasons. The reasons were like Anya said. He
Yeah,
was
yeah.
thinking it was not Ajdukiewicz concept of a journal.
Yeah.
Should be broader.
Okay, I think that Professor Jan Woleński wants to add something. Please, Jan, if you want to say something to us, turn on your microphone.
Studia Logica was organized, was projected, I guess, like Collectanea Logica, a journal which was no, it was not published, but prepared to publication, with volumes, I guess. And Łukasiewicz's idea was that every paper should be published in Polish and in one of international languages. And I think that Łukasiewicz followed this pattern because maybe not exactly, but anyway, many papers in first volumes were published in Polish and in German or English or sometimes Russian. I don't remember. Borkowski and Studia Logica. I don't know details, but seems to me that he published something.
Till 70.
Yes, paper about Łukasiewicz. After Łukasiewicz death, I am not sure. But my explanation is that it was a conflict between mathematicians and philosophers in Wrocław.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
And Borkowski maybe was disappointed by philosophical sensitiveness of Ajdukiewicz to philosophy and philosophy of science. But let me remind that to think that Tarski, as the president of Association of Symbolic Logic, I think it was just before war, wrote a letter to Alonso Church, who was the editor-in-chief of Journal of Symbolic Logic, in which he said that according to me, the journal should be ready to publish papers in philosophy of science, of methodology of science, of course, assuming that they would satisfy scientific criteria. So this wide understanding of logic was very popular even in the circles of mathematical logicians in Warsaw. However, it changed, unfortunately, in after war, because Stowski was, in the opinion, maybe Professor Murawski, he is convinced that leave to me discussions about philosophy. You are a mathematician. And still one addition to my talk. Warsaw, Poland had 4 departments of logic in the interwar period, with mathematical logic, or logic, let's say. And outside Poland was only one, in Minsk, University Department. And the program of teaching in Warsaw was that students could listen to or participate in 20 courses or seminars in logic during studies. And I guess that it was the most populated department of faculty of mathematics and this time in physics, populated by logic in the world. And it also is a testimony how logic was seriously treated in Poland, unfortunately, except Krakow, because after Śleszyński retirement, Department of Logic was closed. And until now, there is no Department of Logic or Foundations of Mathematics in Mathematical Institute in Krakow.
Thank you. Peter Salmos, please.
Hello, thank you. I sort of, in some ways, I don't know the exact details of Bołkowski's disagreement with Studia Logica, but I can trace a kind of similar development. Let's go back to the origins of mathematical logic in Poland. I mentioned that both Łukasiewicz and Leszniewski were trained as philosophers, and they both brought philosophical views to bear in their developments of logic. For instance, Łukasiewicz wanting to provide a rational foundation for indeterminism, Leszniewski wanting to provide a nominalistically acceptable foundation for mathematics, avoiding paradoxes and so on. And you can trace this kind of philosophical motivation for developing logic through others such as Ajdukiewicz and Jaśkowski and various others, through even to Tarski. Now, if you look at the early issues or early numbers of Journal of Symbolic Logic from 1936 onwards, edited by Church, up until probably about 1950 even later, there is an awful lot of philosophically motivated investigations in logical topics. You know, things like Leonard and Goodman and Quine and various other things like that, lots of things. So they're very interesting for a philosopher to read. From some time later, and I sort of noticed it from the 70s onwards, and it may be simply due to the maturation of the subject of mathematical logic, it became a mature subject. The basic lines of inquiry had been sounded out, and what was left to be done in new work were more mathematical details. So the Journal of Symbolic Logic also became mainly a piece of mathematics rather than a piece of logic inspired by philosophy. It was solving technical problems, making technical innovations, and so on. And this led to the foundation of the Journal of Philosophical Logic in the early 70s, basically as a reaction to the overwhelming mathematization of logic in the JSL. So I think this was a parallel development on a more international stage to what was happening in Studia Logica. Whether one thinks of it as showing that mathematical logic had grown up, or whether one thinks of it as showing that it had somehow lost its roots in philosophy is a question that I'm not going to answer. I have my preferences, but that's another matter.
Okay. I would like to show you, yes, I think, okay, Srečko Kovač, before I will show you something. Yes, please, Srečko.
Okay, can I say something?
Yes, please.
So it was just, but if you wanted to put a question, so just go ahead.
No, please, Srečko.
So it was just a small, say, remark or a question. regarding language and Cordula's talk. So I was thinking about, for example, Polish notation, prefix notation. Does it have something to do with some specificity of Polish language, or is it just a technical introduction, technical device? And in connection with this, say, when we comparing, say, this Peano-Russell notation, infix notation, with this Polish prefix notations. So should we, for example, take these Peano-Russell notations as something like a bel canto of logic in comparison to the prefix notation, or is it just a matter of getting used to something, just a matter of training? So just these were some something that I was thinking about. Thank you very much.
So probably may I answer a little bit? So this without brackets notation, Polish notation, let's say, it is not connected with the specificity of Polish language. Only we know, everybody knows it, just because of Leśnicki's idea, yes, of this writing these categories, and then later it was used for natural language by Ajdukiewicz, and now we know it. I mean, everybody knows it. Concerning the question if this notation is really problematic in the sense that it is not intuitive. I had my own private investigations about that, namely my best friend, Professor Czermak, who already died, unfortunately, some two years ago. He was very active during 60s when everybody were writing this Polish notation things, yes? And I asked him how it is, if it is really objectively more, I mean, not enough intuitive, yes? And he claimed that it is really the question of practice, that, I mean, if you read it enough often and write it enough often, then you will see the structure of formulas. So it is my comment to this question which you put, Srečko.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Peter, would you like to add something?
Yes, I would. I used to teach my students not solely Polish notation, but also Polish notation, and get them to translate back and forth, and it was good for them, bilingual notation. The thing about the bracketless prefix notation is it's fine, it works, it's like a VSO language like Irish, it's just different, but it's fine for propositional logic, and it begins to be less useful for predicate logic and anything more complicated. Eventually you're going to need brackets. We know, of course, that Leśnicki would have liked to have infinitely many different kinds of brackets. And, you know, if you read some of Sobocinski's students' papers in Notre Dame Journal, they have sort of 30 different styles of brackets, which, you know, that has its attractions as well. But the point is that Łukasiewicz thought that logic was about truth values. He said logic is its own science. It's not mathematics. It's not philosophy. Its subject matter is the truth values. And that's fine if you're doing propositional logic, which is what Łukasiewicz was ace at. He was really good at that. But when it comes to predicate logic, which Łukasiewicz didn't do so much, he did syllogistic instead. It's much harder because representing quantifier scope has to go with lots of rather ad hoc rules. So the really advanced users of Polish notation, I'm thinking here of Arthur Pryor, when they wanted to disambiguate or make clear even the structure of a complicated quantified sentence in Polish notation, they used brackets just to show the structure, which shows that the notation has its positive side and it has its limitations too. As all I wanted to say. I mean, I love Polish notation, but nobody uses it. I was absolutely scandalized when the revised version of Pryor's book, I think Papers on Time and Tense, came out in piano Russell notation and not Pryor's Łukasiewicz notation. It was a scandal.
May I ask about something? How it was, in fact, somewhere I read that this Polish notation, which we know that it was formulated by Łukasiewicz, originally was, I mean, these first ideas were given by Jaśkowski. Isn't it true? How
No.
it was?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there. So the story has it that the initial version was not written symbols, but blocks of wood, which you can arrange. And of course, blocks of wood don't come with brackets. So you would have to find a way to formulate formulas using blocks of wood. And during the 60s, there was a little game called Woof and Proof, where you could actually use little dice with symbols on them to formulate well-formed formulas and even concoct proofs in Fitch style natural deduction, or we should say Jaśkowski style natural deduction. And it has its advantages. I tried teaching my kids Polish notation. They resisted it, but that they resisted other things I tried to do to them. So like Venn diagrams. So you can't be too heavy-handed as a teacher of your own children. But I don't know about Jaśkowski. I know there's a converse motivation, because it, as Jaśkowski says in his paper on the rule of suppositions, it was a suggestion by Łukasiewicz in 1926 that someone should formalize the way in which we deduce naturally, not using axioms, but suppositions and inferences and dropping assumptions. Just sort of, and Jaśkowski did that brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly. I just wish somebody had done that for Leśniewski's way of doing it, because Leśniewski did natural deduction in his classes as well. It was only for the written work that he did these extremely complicated and precise axioms. And of course, nobody uses axioms anymore. They all use natural deduction, quite rightly.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, Professor Woleński, please.
I guess that Chwistek was very invented this way of writing operators before variables, and he motivated this by mathematical practice. The symbol of function is before arguments. And then Łukasiewicz says about this inspiration. I think very, and so now something to temper. Namely, I heard the following anecdote about Russian Soviet philosopher, because he studied before revolution, but worked during Stalin's era. Asmus. He wrote even a book about definitions, I think translated into German. And according to him, he was visited, so to speak, in quotes, by KGB, and was sure that he was arrested. However, they transported him by car to Kremlin, and to his surprise, he entered the room where the entire Soviet government was present. Stalin was not at the time the prime minister, so someone told him, Comrade Asmus, Comrade Stalin recommended learning logic by Soviet government. And you were chosen as the tutor. Please start. So according to many sources, Stalin was very sympathetic to logic. Maybe not in practice, but at least in theory. So maybe it was known to Polish political authorities that protecting or allowing logic at universities is politically okay. I am not sure about this because it seems to me that efforts of Ajdukiewicz, Czerzowski and others were authentic and had to overcome many difficulties, of course. However, you know, Stalin ordered to co-edit his to publish a new edition of his text, or not his, but textbook of logic, which he used in elementary school, and by almost improbable, however, this that he allowed. However, this textbook was written by a priest.
Okay, thank you very much. Our time is finished now. So I would like in the end to join somehow our first discussion today with our second discussion. In the morning, we presented the encyclopedia of the Warsaw School. Now one of the topic became Borkowski. So let's look at Borkowski's entry in the encyclopedia of the Warsaw School. I will share the screen with you in order to look at it. Sorry. Yeah, where is this sharing? Here. Okay. And let's look at it. Okay, so can you see now the Borkowski's article? I hope yes. And it's his bibliography here. And let's look which journals did he publish in. At first there are książki własne, books written by himself, książki współredagowane, edited books and articles. Okay. Okay. And let's look in the end. Oh, perhaps I will look for Studiologica, okay, this way. Okay. Studiologica. Yes, okay. Jak to zrobić? Perhaps Alexandra will do it.
See, because I know. Oh, here.
Yes, so much of Studiologica. To which years? In the 60s, he still published in Studiologica. Yes, 71 was the last. Okay. Yeah. So perfectly, just as Tadeusz said, in the 70s, beginning of the 70s, something had to change. Perhaps there are some personal reasons, some controversies between various philosophers, logicians. It happens, as we all know. But this is exactly what this encyclopedia is for, in order to check very fast what was happening, what were the publications, and in order to collect all this historical data in one place. Okay. Thank you very, very much to you all for taking part in our meeting, for participating, for your beautiful contributions. I will think about perhaps publishing these contributions in somewhere. We will think about it with Kurdula, okay? She didn't know of that, but okay. Yes, we'll talk about it. And let me also invite you for the third session today at 5:30. So in 2 hours and a little bit, we will have a meeting with our friends from Lviv, from Scottish Cafe. They will present the project of Scottish book. They will talk about history of Scottish book and the new incarnation, let's say, of the Scottish book. So we'll talk about mathematics, logic, and philosophy in Lwów and in Lviv, in the interwar period, and in Lviv now in Ukraine. Thank you once more, and see you later, I hope.
Thank you. Nice to see
Thank you.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All the best. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.